The aircraft carrier, USS Theodore Roosevelt, departed the U.S. 7th Fleet Area of Operations and recently entered the U.S. 3rd Fleet Area of Operations. Roosevelt's entrance in the 3rd Fleet marks the final phase of its 8.5-month deployment before pulling into its new home port of San Diego. The U.S. and Royal Cambodian Navies commenced the 6th Annual Cooperation Afloat Readiness and Training, or CARAT Cambodia exercise. CARAT Cambodia includes 5 days of events in port and at sea, including roughly 200 U.S. sailors and 300 Royal Cambodian sailors. Naval forces from Brazil, Chile, Peru, Mexico, and the U.S. begin UNITAS Atlantic 2015 in Rio Grande, Brazil. UNITAS intends to train participating forces in a variety of maritime scenarios to test command and control of forces at sea. For these stories and more, visit Navy.mil.
The presenter is going to be Chris Day, who's a major in the Army National Guard here in Vermont. And he's going to be speaking about the Vermont experience in the deployment to Afghanistan in 2010. So the Admiral, who is going to speak here in a minute, is going to speak very broadly about the national, or the global scope and scale of the conflict. Chris Day is going to speak very specifically about the Vermont experience in it. So it should be a very interesting contrast, and I think a very engaging topic as well. I bring that up now because there was actually a sign-up sheet in the back. As you walk out the door, feel free to dash your name down now. I'm not collecting money at the moment, but dash your name down so we know if you're interested in attending that. With that note, I'm going to turn the mic. Do you need a mic?
Okay, I'll take it.
Okay, I'm going to turn the mic over to the Admiral, and thank you. Thanks.
Okay. So I've had the opportunity to speak to a couple different audiences. I feel like I'm home here among friends, except for the people that I played bridge with last night. They're not so friendly. But the rest of you, thanks for being here. I had the opportunity, Tom asked me to be here, of course, but I had the opportunity with one of my other brothers, BJ. He asked me to speak a couple of years ago up in Rutland at Chrysler King Elementary School. And I'm telling you this note because at some point we'll engage with questions. In fact, early on we'll do that. And at the elementary school I finished, my wife Sharon was there, Saint Sharon, and she had a picture of an aircraft carrier, was kind of show and tell to these youngsters. And at some point I said, okay, listen, I'm really interested, give me your questions, what do you got? And the first young man says, do you have torpedoes on your ships, and do you fire them and stuff like that? I said, yeah, we do, and sometimes we do, but we try not to do that too much, and we kind of went through that discussion. Second question goes up, this young lady says, do you know my grandmother, Mary Wing? Yeah, actually I do know your grandmother, Mary Wing, and we talked about that for a minute. And the third question came up, and this young man says, listen, you talked about 9/11, but then you talked about 9/12, right? Is that the fraction 9/12 that you're referring to? And at that point, my wife about wet her pants because she said, you've really got this audience right in the grass of your hands, so you're good to go. It's really great to be here home with you, and I'm really happy to support. I really appreciate what John's doing here, leading the charge as far as remembering global war on terrorism veterans, and really kind of getting into that. And we recognize World War II veterans. We talk about them as the greatest generation. We recognize Korean War veterans sometimes. We recognize Vietnam veterans here back in the fall. We had a fantastic event right here in this room for those Vietnam veterans, particularly those that passed away as a result of their service, and it was a very moving event. It was fantastic. And there's the Cold War veterans that served at various times throughout our history over the last 50 years. And then ultimately there's this group that are all volunteers from 9/11 forward. And so I'm going to talk about that a little tonight. I'm going to talk a little bit about where we are in the world and what's going on. Now, some of you might wonder, how did you, as a youngster in Rutland, Vermont, get interested in the Navy that goes on oceans, since there's not so much ocean around Rutland? And the answer to that is that I'm blessed with 3 older brothers, so I am the rookie. And as the rookie, my brother Tom came and saw me when I was a senior in high school, and he suggested, now some of you know how Tom suggests things. He just suggested that I go and take this NROTC, Navy ROTC test. And as a young 17-year-old, I said, "It sounds really interesting, Tom. What is NROTC?" And he said, "You don't need to know that. Just go take the test. And you got your parents paid for 3 tuitions, so you need to get a scholarship. And that's your mission." I said, "Okay, Tom, I got it." So I took the test, and that began my Navy career. I went down and I was fortunate enough to get into Holy Cross College, spent 4 great years there, traveled around the world as a youngster. As a 19-year-old, I went over on my summer work effort with the Navy, and I saw the Berlin Wall, which is pretty amazing for a young man from Rutland, Vermont, to be literally standing on the Berlin Wall before it came down, and really get a taste of the world and what was all about on East Berlin, West Berlin, the people, the city, and the culture, and things like that. So it was pretty neat. So I came to love the Navy. I got out of the Navy for a brief spite, and I went over to Albany Law School for a couple of years because I have number 1 brother's a lawyer, number 2 brother's a lawyer. Seems pretty obvious what I should be doing. And after a couple of years, I decided I didn't have the passion that I wanted for it. So I asked my mother what I should do, and she said, I was thinking about going back in the Navy, and she said, "That's very interesting. But you can do that right after you take and pass the bar exam for New York State, and then do whatever you want." So I said, "Okay, Mom, whatever you say." So I finished there and went back in the Navy, and I drove ships for the next 30 years, essentially, and I stayed in the Navy for 34 years. So that's a little bit about my background, and it's proved positive in our great country that a young man from Rutland, Vermont can have the opportunity to succeed, and through great mentorship of those great leaders that I followed, I was able to succeed and move the ball forward. Now, last week, how many were here to see the video regarding the Pentagon and 9/11? Okay, so a small handful of you, okay. So this video, which is a PBS video, which I saw from out in Seattle, you can pull it up on Netflix or whatever, talks about the Pentagon and what happened that day. And I'll talk about that for a minute or two and go forward. But before that, what is the Pentagon? When was it built? What is the function of the building and everything about it? So somebody help me out. Pentagon. What is that? So the military lives there, works there. Anybody else? Okay, how many people go to work every day at the Pentagon? Maybe 1,000. More than that?
I think more than that.
How about like 22,000? 22,000 people every day go to work at the Pentagon. Okay, and so the service there, the Pentagon, the first pillars of the Pentagon were laid and put in place in 1941 on 9/11. So exactly 60 years to the day, it got hit. So that's the Pentagon. Those are the people that work there. It is the largest office building in the world. There are 200,000 phone calls every day. There are 1 million emails that go out of there every day. There are 17 miles of corridor. So if you want to take a walk, plenty of place to go take a walk. So I just kind of highlight, that's the building. And the way it's built, it's 5 layers. So there's an outer ring, which is the E ring, and then the D ring, and then the C ring, the B ring, and the A ring. And then there's a center courtyard. And so that's the structure of the building. On 9/11, I was there, and we were watching, like you, the TV, and we saw the airplane go into the First World Trade Center building, and knew that something was amiss, but we had never had a situation like this. I mean, we can sit here today and say, well, yeah, that happened, and maybe we should have foreseen it, and there's lots of thoughts along that line, but we always had been prepared to attack somewhere else. We hadn't really envisioned somebody taking an airplane and flying into a building. So they did that twice. We knew there were problems, and those that watched the movie kind of reflected on how the air controllers try to figure out where are all the airplanes from United and American and Southwest and whatever, and who's reporting in and who's not, and ultimately figured there were 2 more up there. One of them that, due to great heroics, fireworks by the passengers went into the ground up in Pennsylvania. That plane was headed towards Washington, D.C. somewhere. And the other one went into the Pentagon. It went into the Pentagon, it hit the E-ring, the most outer ring, and went in, and with the power of it going in, it took off from Dulles, so it had still a full load of gas, which is the problem. It came back and hit the Pentagon, and it hit the E-ring, it hit the D-ring, and went into the C-ring, caused a huge fireball, and created a significant problem. The good news, silver lining on that was the ring of the Pentagon that was most recently renovated, and therefore it was reinforced, and therefore there were still people that hadn't moved back into their office. And so as tragic as it was, there could have been a significantly more loss of life than there was. There were about 150 people that lost their lives, plus the people that were on the airplane. Very tragic. But what I often talk about in these kinds of situations is the tragedy of 9/11, but the inspiration of 9/12. And on 9/12, those 22,000 people came back to work inspired, came back to work with a focus, came back to work in a building that was still burning and still smoking. The President of the United States came over to the building. He got the chiefs of all the services together in a room, and one at a time, he talked to them and said, "Don't ever forget what happened yesterday. Don't ever forget what happened yesterday." Around the room. And I'm pretty close to one of the people that was in the room, and he told me all about it, and it was very inspiring. And so the services then, along with the other government agencies, got together, realized that we can do better, and started to move the ball forward. The day after that, on 9/13, in my portfolio of responsibilities, I was right around the corner from where the airplane hit. And my portfolio of responsibilities was this map about who's responsible for what around the world. And so, before that event, there was no U.S. NORTHCOM where it says United States there.
Oh.
It wasn't such a thing, because why would you need a defense of internal to the U.S.? So as a result of that 9/11, we created this new command that's based out of Colorado Springs, and their total focus is working with the various guard agencies of each of the states and working with the various units within the United States to protect our country, to work closely with the federal agencies, the Border Control, to work closely with TSA, to work closely with the Homeland Security Department in order to protect our country. So that part of the map that now says U.S. NORTHCOM did not exist on 9/11. We learned a lot of lessons. We created a new command to deal with that. They also deal with assisting on Hurricane Katrina and things of that nature. So it's a whole new organization set up to do that. So that is the Pentagon. That is 9/11 and 9/12. And the other piece on the Pentagon is that what's interesting to me is Operation Phoenix. Operation Phoenix, so the Phoenix is rising from the ashes. To repair all the damage to the Pentagon was estimated by the professionals to take 3 years. Operation Phoenix were the people that actually did it. They did it in 11 months. It was unbelievable. It was inspirational. People worked around the clock because they wanted to make it happen, to make it right, to make it whole, to show that while America can get punched, they can take a punch, and we can move forward. They did an amazing job. So, questions about that before I move on? Happy to take any questions.
Is there more than just the military agency in the Pentagon? Are there other agencies that work out of there too?
There are not. The State Department has their own building. The Homeland Security has a different building. Coast Guard has a different building. So within the Pentagon, you have the Army, the Navy, Air Force, Marine Corps, and the Joint Arena staffs. And all of the civilians that support those services. Good question. Excuse me. You're the honor graduate so far, so keep it up. What do you got?
today's USA, is it, would you say, is strong as it was on 9/11? Or I would say, maybe I'm saying it wrong, not as strong, but the people are as committed now as they were back then.
When you say the people, do you mean the citizens, you mean the soldiers, what do you mean?
Just the
Military.
country in general.
The country itself?
Yeah, like on 9/11, I mean, you had people from all over New York. Everybody worked to get it straightened, and like you said with the Pentagon.
Right,
Would that happen today?
I think so.
Yeah.
And I'm an optimist, and I'm a glass half full kind of guy, and I'm very optimistic about our country. That said, I'm also realistic about what the state of the world today. I'm going to walk you through that a little bit over here. So we're talking about global war and terrorism. We're talking about the military since 9/11. And so what I want to do is, when are you going to cut me off? What time are you going to cut me off?
Keep going.
Good call. Okay.
Sir?
So what we're talking about is, I'm just going to walk around the world just for a minute and give you a sense of what's going on from my perspective. And so the easy part is in the Americas, north and south. You've got, obviously we've got immigration challenges. How do we deal with that? We've got drug challenges. How do we deal with that? You go down to Mexico, they've got challenges. We're working with them to work forward as a team to deal with the various problems that we had. You go down to Colombia, down here in South America. They've recently succeeded in solving their problems with the FARC, which is the counter-revolutionaries, and that's actually a good news story. You got the Panama Canal, which is, they've got a whole new version of the Panama Canal that can take bigger ships. That'll be a big deal as we go forward. So the Americas itself, with the exception of Venezuela, which has got significant problems both with their government and their finances, not too bad off. We go over across the Atlantic to Africa, and you had something called the spring, help me out, what was it called? The Arab Spring. And then all these countries around here, from Libya to Egypt to Syria and these other countries, all had revolutions of some sort, of which we participated, certainly in the Libyan one. And the idea was that the Arabs would take control of their countries, democracy would spring, and it didn't exactly happen that way. And so today, we're dealing with problems in Libya in a big way. We're dealing with problems in South Sudan, where they have significant problems with various refugee camps. We're dealing with challenges in the Gulf of Guinea, which is over here, where they have significant oil reserves. And with oil reserves and with money comes significant graft and significant problems. We're dealing with problems over here in Somalia on this side, where they are famous for their piracy and taking over lots of ships coming and going. That piracy has been dealt with, but the country is still a basket case as far as its organization, and we're involved with helping them out. We're dealing with challenges with Egypt and the Suez Canal to make sure that waterway stays open for commerce. So is it a lot? Yeah, it's a lot, not as bad as other places. So we go from relatively benign in the green to challenges in Africa, and then we go to Europe. And in Europe, it gets more challenging as Great Britain has just left the EU, which is a very big deal about their relationship with the rest of the countries in Europe. They're still part of NATO, but they left that. The U.S. presence, we determined over the years that we used to have 100,000 Army personnel and some Air Force in Germany. Well, back around 9/11, we were wondering, why do we have all these people overseas? So a lot of those people came back. So we don't have a huge presence over there, which may be exactly right, may not be exactly right, but it's just a fact. And therefore, when the Russians are doing some folly over there, we don't have a lot of people over there on the ground to help out. There's significant issues with migration across the Mediterranean Sea right here, coming from Syria and all around Africa, up through Turkey, Greece, and going up into Europe. This is a major league problem where boats carrying up to 300 people are transiting over from Libya to Italy and other places. Some of them make it, some of them don't. And those that don't is a significant loss of life and a major league problem. And we haven't really solved that. The only solution, frankly, is to deal with the problem at the source, and that's over in Syria, where there's obviously a big war going on, and that's the genesis of a lot of these refugees. Belgium. Belgium is a country that had very open borders, and they embraced a lot of different people coming from Pakistan and a lot of other parts of that area, mostly Muslims and others. The challenge for Belgium now, they're recognizing, as well as a number of those other countries, is with those open borders and then with that flood of different people, they now face significant social challenges in their countries. Significant social challenges to the point where some of those minorities are essentially indicating they're going to outpopulate the native Belgians and take that country over. It's a very real concern about what's going to happen over there for them. Sweden is thinking about joining NATO, which would be unheard of in the past because they're very neutral. Finland is very concerned that Russian is always on their border, and that's a big challenge for the Finns. And Germany is holding out to keep sanctions on the Russians because the Russians, which is really the biggest bear in this area, have acted not in accordance with the rule of law here recently. So they've taken over Crimea, which is an island in the Black Sea, which traditionally was theirs, but it's really part of the Ukraine. And they've got significant forces on the border with Ukraine, which any day could cause more folly and more hardship for a lot of people. The people in the Baltics, which are Estonia, Latvia, Bulgaria, Romania, they all used to be a part of what you used to call, when you were growing up, the USSR. So before Russia was the USSR. USSR included Poland, it included Ukraine. When Gorbachev in '89 took down the wall, and he also essentially freed up these countries to go back to their roots and be their own independent countries. The current president of Russia thinks that was the worst folly in history and wants to recreate that USSR. The countries that have been freed up live in the shadow of Russia and are very fearful that any day Russian troops will come onto their countries and pull them back into that sphere. That's a big problem, and he's doing a lot of this because the economy in Russia is not good at all. They're suffering from sanctions that have been imposed on them because of their bad actions, and it's a very, very big problem that could be even worse. So that's a little bit about Europe. And then lastly, I'll touch on Asia, which is obviously the biggest continent on the planet. And in the case of Asia, I had this group called ISIS, Al-Qaeda, bad guys. And they were successful taking a significant amount of land in Iraq, as well as in Syria. And they are gradually being beaten back by the combined forces of a number of countries. That said, their philosophy of continuing to wreak havoc in the West can appear in the streets of Paris, or can appear in the streets of London, or can appear in the streets of Brattleboro, Vermont, for that matter. In Bill Holiday, I talked to the students over there today, and he was reminding the students that before 9/11, there was no security officer at Brattleboro High School. There were no video cameras in Brattleboro High School. There were no TSA agents at the airports. And so as a result of the ISIS activities and the Al-Qaeda activities, you and I live under a different rule of law here in the United States because of concern on how best to protect our citizens. So you've got that going, you've got the Iraq challenge, Iran has got some challenges. We're still in Afghanistan despite our best efforts to get out of there. India is growing in size and in population. It will be the most populous country here in about 10 years. And then you come to China and Korea and Japan. So when you go over in this part of the world in the Pacific, there's a lot of history, and not a lot of it good history, between the Korean Peninsula, China, and Japan. And you can go back centuries, and those three cultures have fought against each other for those centuries. And in North Korea, they've got a dictator who clearly has got some mental challenges, and he's got nuclear weapons, and he's trying to figure out how to put them on submarines and how to reach out and strike whoever he can to give himself status. That's a problem that's going to have to be addressed certainly in the next period of time. I won't put a number on that, but they are a client state of China, and China is their protector, but China has been pulling away from them, realizing that North Korea's got big problems. South Korea is a vibrant economy, as opposed to North Korea, which has got little or none. And the Japanese suddenly are rewriting their constitution to, as of World War II, the Constitution indicated they could only have defensive forces. Now, because of what's going on with China, reaching out into the Pacific and claiming this area in the Pacific as their own and fighting with Japan over rights to oil and other things, the Chinese are saying, we own all the way out here. Japanese are changing their constitution, which is amazing, to suggest that they can have offensive weapons. So we've seen this play act out before, and it didn't really work out that well. So am I concerned about the state of play in the world? Absolutely I am. And what's interesting to me is that on any given day, last weekend, it's a fact that the United States military dropped bombs in 6 countries over the weekend. Did you know about that? Probably not. So they dropped bombs in Libya, they dropped bombs in Syria, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Yemen, and in Somalia, all over the weekend. One of the young students was very insightful this morning, and she said, well, I don't get it. Why don't I know about that? You know, and partial answer is the press kind of goes to a Paris bombing. The press will go to other places, but the press has not necessarily latched on to the reality that our country is at war every day around the world. And she said, well, who's deciding on where we go or what we do? And the fact of the matter is the president is the commander-in-chief, and ultimately he decides where we're going and what we're going to do, and the military carries that out. The challenge for the military is trying to figure out and working with the civilian masters on what is our national security strategy. What are the things that are in the vital interest of the United States? Where do we really want to be around the world? Is it really important that we're in Yemen or not? Is it really important we're in Somalia? Should we be dealing differently with China? How about Russia? What should we be dealing with them? And so at the end of the day, and the reason I'm honored to be with you here now, is that those sailors, soldiers, airmen, Marines, and Coast Guardmen are out there tonight, and they are working really hard. They are very good. They are all volunteers, and they're around the world doing the bidding of our National Command Authority. And you as citizens, you know, the so what for you is, you know, to be aware of what's going on, to work with your representatives to help shape that vision, that national strategy, and ask questions. Why are we here? What are we doing? I'm not suggesting in my case I'm either a pacifist or a warrior per se, but I am here to suggest it's very important that our country figures out what's in our vital national interests. Where do we really need to be before we spill one drop of American blood? Have we thought that through, and is it really worth it? And I'm here to suggest that certainly for the military, a lot of thought goes into that question. And they advise the Secretary of Defense, the President, on what they recommend we should do or we should not do. And that equation all gets considered and moves the ball forward. Okay, so break. What else is the military doing for you here today? And the answer to that is, if there is a, what? John's gonna ask a question. Okay.
I was going to, can you take back that map?
Sure.
You've spent a great deal of time in the Persian Gulf.
Right.
And I think it'd be interesting if you tell us a little bit about that experience and the geography over here and what's going on now with Iran and Saudi Arabia and Yemen and so forth.
In 2003, I was on the aircraft carrier USS Constellation. And we were talking earlier to the press, standing up. And I told them how we had 3 aircraft carriers here in 2003. One here, and one here. And we had 30 reporters on board for 6 weeks on the Constellation. How fun can that be? Actually, it was great. And it's kind of all about how you deal with these things. And each time we had reporters coming on board, they stayed with us, and they were a good team. And I recognized they had to do their job. And therefore, I wanted to make sure that I helped them do their job. I also recognized that I really want the people in Brattleboro, Vermont, and in Austin, Texas, and in Seattle, Washington, to know what their sons and daughters are doing over there. So I was glad to have those reporters on board. And I'd bring them on board, and I'd say, okay, here's the deal. You can walk around this ship and talk to any sailor, and you can write your story. And there will not be one of my people with you to hold your hand or to guard you or to guard what you say, and I'm not going to rewrite your stories. And they would look at me like, yeah, really? You're really going to let us do that? And I said, look, I am willing to accept the risk that there'll be a couple stories that I'm maybe not proud of. And in a city of 5,500 people on that carrier, there's going to be a couple people that aren't happy. I'm okay with that. But I guarantee you that there are thousands of stories for these youngsters, average age about 20 and a half of 5,500, that I want people to know at home what they're doing. And so off they went, they told their stories, I met with them every day, I told them what we did yesterday. And I gave them plenty to write about, and they did a pretty good job. So we put that information out, and some of the things that we were concerned with back then were 3 things. Out of the southern tip of Iraq there, whether there be suicide airplanes coming up or missiles that could come out and reach us, because the Persian Gulf is a pretty small bathtub. So you got 3 big aircraft carriers there, they got to be well protected. So we dealt with that, we figured out plans how to deal with a suicide airplane, and we took care of it. We were concerned about oil platforms up by where it says Kuwait. And those oil platforms are very important because that's where the oil that comes out of Iraq gets put into tankers. They're about 15 miles off of the coast. And so we came up with a plan with Navy SEALs to deal with those. And there was some oil for food people on the platforms that needed to be rescued. And I had attempted to get approval for our plans to take those platforms and make sure they were safe. But I was told early on that would be premature and we needed to hold off on that. And I said, I don't want to be responsible for the cleanup when these people blow stuff up. I would rather just take it and own it and deal with it. Anyways, these oil for food people were on there, and they phoned home because they needed to be rescued, and the Iraqis were coming out and they were doing some different things on the platforms. And because of that call, I got a call at 2 o'clock in the morning on the aircraft carrier to figure out, go between these oil platforms here and the waterway that goes up here and rescue these oil for food people. One was from Chile, one was from France, and one was from Poland. And rescue them. And I said, this is great. No PowerPoints, no staff, no nothing. Just a 3-star admiral telling me, make this happen. I said, I love that. So he called up some of our young sailors late at night. They went up there with a helicopter and with some small boats and the Coast Guard. We rescued these guys in the morning. They told the story, and that went back to the Pentagon back to the president, and that night, they approved the plan for our SEALs, your SEALs, to go and capture those oil platforms, make sure they weren't blown up. And today, 90% of the economy of the country of Iraq goes through those two oil platforms. So those Navy SEALs did an amazing job to make sure those are secure. Then lastly, our third challenge was mines. In the first Gulf War back in the 90s, mines were floating around up in the waters there, untethered, just floating around, and unfortunately 2 Navy ships got hit, the Tripoli and the Princeton, and significant damage to the ships and a big problem. So we were determined this time that was not going to happen. So what we did is we put ships right up close where it says Kuwait, and anything that came out of Iraq got inspected by young 18, 19, 20-year-old men and women out on rubber rafts, and they inspected everything that came out and made sure there were no mines associated with it. And on the day the war began, a tugboat came out with a barge next to it. Happens on a regular basis. The barge usually carries oil or sludge or waste. And I looked at it and said enough. And those youngsters from the UK, from Australia, and from the US went on board, and because they're so professional, they uncovered a plot where they had these mines covered with 50-gallon drums that if you're just looking at it, didn't look like anything. But because they were very thorough, pulled back the drums, they discovered 86 mines, which any one of them could do a significant damage to the ships. As a result of the great work of those youngsters, people's lives were saved, the war went forward, and we succeeded. So, what else? We flew 24 hours a day airplanes so that the Marines and the Army would have an airplane over their head 24 hours a day as they went to Baghdad, and that worked out very well. And at the end of the day, I was reading something about the Commandant of the Marine Corps just the other day, and he talked about this a little bit. And he says something to the effect of, he said, basically the question from the reporter is, what's it like for your people today, and as you look back, how are they doing? And essentially he said, hey, look at, over the last 15 years, which is what we're talking about tonight, those military personnel have done an amazing job. They went up to Baghdad, they did some other fighting, they did a fantastic job of working with the people at the tactical level. The Marines, the soldiers, the sailors, and the airmen did a great job, brave, heroic, resilient, honorable, and ethical. And that's exactly right. The fact that our government, you could argue, or others fumbled the ball in the aftermath shouldn't take away from the reality that the military people did their part of the job. The fact that we have challenges still is a whole different issue. But that's that. So that kind of comes back to your question. My point in this discussion is it a dangerous world today? You bet. Are we under attack every single day in a cyber world? So cyber computer attacks, this kind of thing. Every day there are tens of thousands of attacks on both the Pentagon, on Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, other suppliers to the Pentagon, by professionals from both China, Russia, and other places that are trying to steal our trade secrets and trying to get inside of our computer systems. That's a significant problem. In the future, water will be a resource that is as valuable or more valuable than oil. Fresh water, or the lack of it, is killing thousands of people in Africa today. And that's going to continue to be an issue that we need to look at. Technology will continue to improve dramatically, and there's going to be breakthroughs in the future on what's going on with the technology. 70% of the world's population is 100 miles from a coastline. 80% of the trade of the world goes over the water, and 90% of communications between the continents goes through fiber cables underneath the water. So what? That's what your Navy's doing tonight, that's what the Air Force is doing tonight, protecting that and trying to create the environment where trade can succeed around the world, economies can flourish, and as a result, we can enjoy the living that we do have here both in America and other places. So let me wrap up and then take some of your questions. I meant to get your questions on the way, but Tom got me on a roll, so blame him. I am very, very upbeat about our military today. You should be so very proud of them. I was mentioning to the students earlier today, some of you that were in Vietnam era, when you came back, you were either shunned, spit upon, or otherwise. And it was not a very proud time for our country. From 9/11 forward, one of the definite positive outcomes of that is that people who see people in uniform in airports will say, thanks for your service. It's a small thing, but I can tell you that the people in uniform appreciate that. And it's a very significant turn in our country to appreciate the military. The military, when they do these annual Forbes survey of the most trusted institutions in the country, traditionally has the military at the top of the 90%, and shockingly enough, your U.S. Congress at the bottom at about 9%, as far as people, credibility, respect, and that kind of thing. So, you know, and wrapping up, there's so much to be proud of these youngsters that are out there doing amazing things. Young, brave, ordinary people doing extraordinary things on a daily basis. So that's where I kind of leave you with the glass is half full. It's a dangerous world. You need to be aware of that. And we're involved around the world. And it's a healthy thing to continue to question, why are we involved here? What are we doing there? Is that in our best national interest or not? And where are we going to go as we go forward? Okay, questions? Questions. Okay, what's my favorite color? Blue. Okay, I got that one. My favorite baseball team, the Yankees. Okay, go ahead.
We've all seen in the news how Russian air jets were flying so close to I think a destroyer, and also in the Persian Gulf, you've seen a lot of ships sailing up to our ships. Is there kind of this disrespect we're getting from these navies and different things? Are they testing us? Do you see as an admiral what is the purpose of this kind of action?
Okay. In the case of the Russians, great question. In the case of the Russians, they are flying very close to our ships up here in the Baltic as we do exercise with the Swedes and the Russians and the other countries up in that area. They're also flying very close to our ships down here in the Black Sea. They're doing that, in this case, it's directly from the president, and I know that for a fact, because with the finite resources that President Putin has, he's attempting to stir up a nationalistic fervor of Russians first, Russian history, Russian nationality, Russian pride, and that kind of a thing. And so with those finite resources that he has, and he's putting a lot of money into his military, he's trying to demonstrate that Russia is still a major player on the world stage. Now, the U.S. Navy commanders of those destroyers and those other ships have shown admirable restraint, which is what we're taught, and that they could knock those planes out of the air very easily, very far away, not a problem. But they don't, because they're professionals, they're adults, and they recognize what's going on. So that's the case both up in the Baltic and down in the Black Sea, and that's happening with some regularity. Boy, where I come, that means you buy around. In the case of, what was the other one you said?
The Persian Gulf.
The Persian Gulf. Oh, with the Iranians. Similarly, Iran, it's interesting because it's very difficult, even if you study it, to understand the difference between the Shiites, the Shias. There's different brands of Shiites, different brands of Shias. Who's got what in the majority in Saudi Arabia? Who's got the majority in Iran, Iraq? They're all different tribes that go back thousands of years in history. In the case of Iran, we recently made a nuclear deal with them to deal with their nuclear technology issues. When that deal was made with Secretary Kerry and the President, once that deal was made, significant resources, financial resources went to that country that had been held in abeyance. Those resources are now being used to continue to funnel to Hezbollah and other terrorist groups to stir discontent both in Lebanon, in Yemen, in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, and other places. Similarly to my point about President Putin and the Russians, the mullahs in Iran continue to flex their muscles. This spikes up every period of time, every 5 to 10 years, where you'll get the Iranians acting up with their radars or with their ships and harassing our ships as they go in and out of the Straits of Hormuz. Is irrational, only rational in the sense that it's another nationalistic thing. See, we can take on the big United States and that kind of thing. At the end of the day, it would end badly for Iran, but for their own purposes, they do these little demonstrations. Does that answer your question? It's all about nationalism. Would you agree, Jen?
Yeah, exactly.
Other questions?
With all the damage that we did in Iraq, well, all the countries around there, and all the innocent people that were just like we were killed, and at least their country's been practically to rubble. Is there any resurgence in these people rebuilding, or is it just, they're just living from hand to mouth? And
Okay, really good question. I have not stood, well, actually that's not true. I've been in southern Iraq, but I haven't been there recently. The various agencies from the UN, the United Nations, have been over there helping people to go forward. The people of Iraq have different groups in the sense that there's a very educated class in Iraq, and then there's people with lesser and lesser education, like anywhere else, I suppose. I would say that in certain areas that the country has resurged and flourished and has somewhat of a vibrant society. In the areas where ISIS has taken over, it's rubble. And they're going to have to figure out how to bring that back. So it's a mixed answer. Some yes, some not so much. It's a work in progress, like Afghanistan, like other countries. Go ahead.
If we became less dependent on oil and gas and more like on solar panels and other type of energy, would the Middle East run out of money in like 10 years? Would that help?
If the world did, or the U.S.?
Well, let's start with the U.S.
If the U.S. did, it would be interesting, but the reality is that the oil that comes out of the Persian Gulf, most of it actually goes east. And it goes east to go to fuel China, Japan, and Korea, and those countries. Less and less of it is going west over to the U.S. We're getting more and more of our oil either from the U.S. or some from Canada, some from South America, some from the Gulf of Guinea. So we're relying less and less on the Persian Gulf oil. If your answer is, if the question is, if the world stopped needing oil and had renewable energy, I think it would be great for everything. The question is really, at what point in our technology advancement will we be able to get there? And that's a challenge that we got to figure out how to bring on solar, wind, all these other things in such a way that they actually produce that energy that you want to replace, and in such a way that they're not so intrusive to the neighborhoods that they're in. Yes?
Could you give us some insight into Saudi Arabia, their role right now and go forth? It's a huge country. Don't know that much about them being our friends or not friends. What are your insights on Saudi Arabia at this point?
The oil prices going down certainly hurts them a little bit, but they are a significant country with significant resources. They also, for years, have allowed a significant amount of unemployment, a significant amount of lack of education, if you're not in the royal family or otherwise. And that has fostered, in my opinion, a certain amount of unrest where they go to, what schools they go to are religious schools that teach a lot of hatred and destruction as opposed to the positive attributes. So I'm worried a great deal about Saudi Arabia. They are under attack every day in one fashion or another by Iran, their hated enemies. And I'm very concerned about the future. Their military, at least speaking for the Navy, is very professional, very well educated, very sharp, but their populace and the royal family is gradually coming to this realization, too little, too late, is they need to invest in their education system, they need to invest in their employment system, they need to put their people to work. Essentially what they've done is they bought people from, whether it's the Philippines, India, other countries, and they're doing all the work. And people on the street are either unemployed, undereducated, or otherwise. So it's a definite problem that needs to be addressed. I think there's a realization of that problem, and hopefully they can catch it before things get too far out of hand.
Thank you.
Other questions?
You mentioned a little bit ago about in the area of the Balkans and other areas where the leadership on ships showed great signs of restraint when provoked or whatever. Do you have any concerns with an election coming up that we might have a commander-in-chief that wouldn't promote restraint?
Okay, good question. Next question.
Good answer.
How do I answer that?
No
I
comment?
think that's your question, Jenna. We've got a great country, and sometimes things are said in the heat of the political discussion that go on. We have layers of civilians in the Defense Department that advise. We have military people that are very level-headed and very well-educated and advise. So am I concerned if we had such a thing? Absolutely. I'm hopeful that whoever it is will recognize what we need to do to move the country forward. What else? Go ahead.
I wanted to ask about the screening situation that allows or doesn't allow immigrants to come into this country. Do you know anything about what is so wrong with it? Why does it keep happening that we get people who are supposedly, jihadist or, negative in some way toward us in this country?
Yeah, I honestly cannot answer that question. It's beyond the scope of what I know.
Given the current situation during Iraq and Afghanistan, as far as the populace, do you feel that they are becoming more involved with their saving their country, if you will? Not only the military, but the politicians. In other words, when this started, everybody was for himself, and they didn't want anything to do with it. And we're over there taking care of it for them. Are they finally getting to the point where they're trying to do it themselves?
Right. I think there's two different cases.
Right.
So in Afghanistan, I would say that since 9/11, for the last 15 years, your country has invested a lot of money in education, in voting, in promoting democratic values in the country of Afghanistan. Education of women that didn't happen before, and equal rights and all that kind of stuff. And I would say that the populace writ large is supportive of that. I would also say that the Taliban, who are the other team, is not. And they are in a resurgence now. The president had hoped to have all the U.S. troops out of Afghanistan by now, but we've got 10,000 there, and they're going to stay there to continue to attempt to promote a secure environment where people can succeed and go forward. The historical long view of that piece is the Russians invaded Afghanistan, didn't work out well for them. Alexander the Great invaded Afghanistan, didn't work well for him. And so Afghanistan has been invaded and taken over or supported whatever for centuries. And everybody that's come in, at the end of the day, didn't do well. We're trying to set a precedent where it can succeed with their own people And the specific answer to your question is I believe the Afghanis are on the team. Can they actually do it? I don't know. Is there military on the team? Yes. Can they restrain the tribes of the Taliban without us propping them up? Probably not. So we'll see how long this country is willing to stay there to prop them up to create the environment. In the case of Iraq, not so much. Not so much in the sense of, I think the politicians are still for themselves. I think it's everybody for themselves in that. And I don't think there's that unity of government and unity of focus. I'm an Iraqi, I'm proud of it, and we're going to move this ball forward. I'd like to say that it was. I'd like to have a rose-colored glass on that, but I'm not as optimistic in that particular case. And that whole area between there and Syria, you got the Kurds, you got the Turks. I mean, you've got a lot of ethnicities there, all with their own historical background, and all with a lot of conflict in that whole area, so that's more difficult. Go ahead.
My granddaughter and I had, it was her project, but I helped her with it. It's 10 years old, and she had picked Iran for her under protest. Isn't it true that the women over there are nothing more than cattle, and that they are married off at 13 and 10 years old to 80 years old men?
I had a place in San Diego that I rented to a lady doctor from Tehran. And I think in certain societies, what you say is true. I would say in the case of Iran,
It said it's like a resurgence of this, and the women that have been educated up until that point are basically trying to get the heck out of Dodge.
Yeah. Okay, maybe you know more than I do. You do the project, I do the project. But I think actually the Iranian people are pretty well educated people.
Yeah.
They're suffering under a leadership that is a totally religious bent on them and some definite challenges. But I think the Iranian people per se, other countries maybe more of that going on in that area.
Probably where the Taliban are.
Yeah. Okay, going, last question.
I got one that just personally on the Pentagon attack. I know you were there personally. Bang, it's all happened. What part did you have to be involved with that? You know, there's going to be so much confusion and chaos here. Is it a specific thing you had to do, or go somewhere special, or just it was craziness?
Well, that's right. I mean, it's craziness in the sense that the Pentagon gets hit. People are trying to figure out where the airplanes are. Our airplanes, right? American airplanes. It's not like an airplane came from Iraq or something like that, but it's American Airlines. And people are trying to grapple with that. As you saw in the movie, the air controllers, they're trying to figure out where everything is. And the American people watching TV are trying to figure out what's going on. And they got two monuments, the World Trade Towers, that are crashing to the ground. Get the Pentagon on fire. And so they're trying to figure that out. Within the Pentagon piece of it in Washington, D.C., there's a lot of rumors that happen like that as soon as that goes on. There's another plane that's headed towards the White House, headed towards the Capitol. We're scrambling jets to go up and intercept. I don't know what they're going to shoot down an airplane with the U.S. people on it and kind of try to figure that through, because it's not something we ever thought about. So in the case of the Pentagon, we're trying to, in order to allow the first responders, the police, the fire, the rescuers, the medics, to do their job that they're trained to do, the really initial reaction was get everybody out of the building and allow us to do our job. And so, of the 22,000 people, there was an evacuation order, get outside, get out of the way. We don't know if there's anything else coming in. There's a theory that maybe there's another airplane coming in. And so really the idea was to get people out of there. So leadership basically tried to maintain a communication with the rest of the military commands. So I was involved with that. But beyond that, the reality is let the people who are trained to do it, the medics, police, fire, do their job, get out of the way. Don't try to have too many heroes jumping into something and compounding the problem. So, I mean, I was right around the corner, but my job was to help the command center continue to communicate with the rest of the military and what was going on. So, that was it. thank you for your attention. Thanks for being here, seriously. I know some of you had other things to do tonight, and you were asked very kindly by Tom to come here. So I appreciate you doing that, I really do. And it's great to be back in the family here, and thanks a lot.
Admiral, just to reiterate our thanks again, when we met about a month ago to talk, and the Admiral was very gracious, he asked what would I like to talk about. I said, well, if you could talk about the entire world over the past 15 years, that would be great, but keep it succinct. So I think you did a wonderful job, so again, if you would mind giving another hand.